Hello, you're here with the AntiFans, and we're doing another Fantasy Footnotes.
Yes, we are. We're going to break down some wide receivers today and talk about each of our top 15 ranks and then get into just some in general overvalued, undervalued guys after that.
So getting into the rankings, we're going to do it on a tier system. Basically, tier 1, those are guys that are solidly in the first round. Tier 2, that's like guys you want to be taking in the end of the first, early second round. Tier 3, solid second rounders. Tier 4, end of the second, early third rounders. And Tier 5, that would round out the top 15 receivers, and those guys are solidly in the third round. So start us off on your Tier 1 receivers.
All right, so I got two guys up there. Got Julio Jones, Odell Beckham Jr.
I've got the same guys in the reverse order. Tell me why you think Julio is better than Odell.
Julio Jones is just physical freak, got amazing size, been the man from who knows when, like middle school probably. He had the most targets last year. He's had the second most yards the past 2 years total,
right.
Following just behind Antonio Brown, who we'll get into a little bit later. Well, we might not be as high on. I don't know, everyone thinks he's like super injury riddled. Mm-hmm. But it's just been like the 1 year that he got destroyed. He played like 5 or 6 games.
Right.
And other than that, been like very reliable.
Yeah. I think Julio also has never had a big touchdown season. So if he ever had a big touchdown season, that would launch him into like a unicorn status at wide receiver. He would decimate the competition.
Yeah, he'd be a narwhal.
I like Odell Beckham better in his 2 years in the league. He's been around 2 standard deviations from the median owned receiver, which typically the top 2 receivers are the only guys in that category. That's why I like Odell Beckham. He has missed games both of his first 2 years. The first year because of injury, last year because Josh Norman got in his head and he went bananas after him. But I think Odell Beckham's due for a good year. I like the coaching change to improve his chances, and I think he's going to be the number 1 receiver in fantasy.
Plus, those 2 guys are just like a lot of fun to own. You're not going to really be disappointed at all. Yeah. Our next tier, what do you got on that?
Mine's led off actually at number 3 with Mike Evans, a bit of a surprise candidate. Des Bryant at number 4 and Antonio Brown slotting in at number 5, well behind his average draft position. I like Mike Evans because his touchdowns in his rookie year were solid at 9. Last year, they fell to 3. That's a huge drop. In terms of points per target, he was the lowest of the top 50 receivers at less than 1.926 points per target. If his touchdowns just increase in volume, the number of targets that he gets, he would easily be a top 10 receiver and has the ceiling to be potentially the number 1 receiver in fantasy, at least the top 5, top 3 option. That's why I've got him slotted in at number 3.
I have him a little later on in the discussion, but I like that. He feels like a guy that will take a big leap in his third year. He's got the talent, the draft pedigree, and just that offense in general, I think, is growing and improving. Right. And
yeah, Winston.
Bold call, but yeah, I like it.
Winston going into his second season probably has a better year than his rookie year. It's typical of quarterbacks unless they're RG3. So.
All right, so on my second tier, I got the Antonio Brown at number 3, got Dez at 4, and DeAndre at 5. So Brown, probably a bit of an elephant in the room, should maybe talk about. Yeah, he's awesome. He has been really consistent in his career generally.
Right.
Had monster years the past 3 seasons.
Right.
But I think it's just like maybe his time is going to run up here. He's so dependent on Roethlisberger. We saw last year where for like a course of 5 weeks, his luck ran out there when he didn't have his guy. And right. Big Ben gets hurt about every year. Some other...
you can set your clock to it.
Yeah. Some other suspensions going on there. Like right. Martavis isn't going to be there this year. Right. And Antonio Brown's only been the number 1 receiver in fantasy when he's got Martavis there next to him. Right. So I think that draws attention. I don't know if Coates and Wheaton are going to be enough to do that.
Right.
So.
Yeah. A couple other points. Antonio Brown has been the number 1 receiver in fantasy 2 years in a row. Nobody has ever been the number one receiver in fantasy more than 2 years in a row.
Yeah.
Calvin Johnson's the only guy that's finished in the top 2 3 years straight, and he's maybe the best receiver ever.
Top 3 for sure.
I don't think Antonio Brown is the best receiver ever. I don't even think he's close. I think his ability to separate is based on quickness and speed, not based on size. And guys like that, the wall comes earlier, the cliff comes earlier. They fall off a lot faster. So a guy like Julio Jones, he's a big guy. He can keep getting volume based in the red zone and just by being bigger than the guy next to him. Antonio Brown, when he loses just a pinch of that quickness, he's going to fall off quickly. So I think Antonio Brown's due to slip this year.
All right, you heard it here, guys. We're like Brown, but we don't love Brown. So next little area here are our second rounder types. I'm looking at AJ Green, Jordy Nelson, T.Y. Hilton, and Mike Evans make an appearance here. What do you got?
I got a lot of the same guys: Jordy Nelson, Alshon Jeffrey, T.Y. Hilton, and DeAndre Hopkins. Alshon Jeffrey is a guy that I've got in this tier that you don't. If you look at his numbers based on average points per game last year, even in a down year where he wasn't healthy, probably any games that he played, he fought through it, ended up 13th in terms of receivers and average points per game. I could see that going up with the addition of Kevin White, drawing a little bit of attention. I think Alshon Jeffrey is a solid top 10 receiver, and you can get a good value on him, picking him up a round early.
Yeah, I don't hate it. I especially like your Kevin White point. You know, he did great with Marshall next to him. This could be similar. Some attention. Yeah, pretty good call. I got him later, but I see what you're saying. Here for me, most interesting thing is probably T.Y. Hilton. We both have him here, which is he's going in like the early 5th, so we got him like 3 rounds higher. Mm-hmm. He just he's been so consistent. He's been over 1,000 yards past 3 years. I think over 1,300 yards one of those years.
Yeah, and that was 2 years ago when Andrew Luck was healthy.
Yeah, and I mean, Luck had a nightmare year last year, and what a T.Y. Hilton had just over 1,000 yards, 5 TDs.
Right. He's
not a big TD guy. If those numbers ever go up, he could be a top 5 receiver. So.
He got the TDs.
So yeah, I have a really good feeling about him this year. I think he could have his best season yet.
Maybe he matures a little bit.
Yeah,
moves up a cup size.
Yeah, man, he's he's up for it.
I think so too. I think that Colts offense was really bad last year. I think Luck gets healthy this year. I think T.Y. Hilton's going to have a monster year, maybe even get into the double-digit touchdown range, which would vault him into a top 5 receiver status.
Yeah, and like you wouldn't even have to take T.Y. Hilton in the second round, but I think it would work out well if you did. So.
Yeah, you got to reach on him a little bit, I think.
Yeah.
Because if you try and get him in the 5th round and he goes in the 4th, I think you're going to be kicking yourself for not taking him. All right, the next group of receivers, I've got AJ Green, Amari Cooper, Demaryius Thomas as kind of the end of the 2nd, early 3rd round selections.
I got Brandon Marshall, Brandon Cooks, and Alshon Jeffrey making an appearance. Those are just guys, I don't know, you kind of aren't in love with, but I think they're not going to disappoint you if you take them a little early there.
Yeah, I think, Marshall, AJ Green, Demaryius Thomas, those are solid guys. They do it every year for the most part. Demaryius Thomas, interestingly enough, a lot of people are citing the drop in quarterback play as a reason that he might not be that good this year. He was 49th in terms of points per target last year, slotting in just ahead of Mike Evans. So even though the volume might be down a little bit if they're more run heavy and if they're having to rely on Mark Sanchez, if he just scores some more touchdowns, he could still remain right around the same position that he was at last year if that normalizes a bit.
Yeah, and I don't know, that quarterback play is not going to be much worse. It was pretty abysmal, and they won the Super Bowl last year. So what are we looking at on that 5th tier?
5th tier guys that should be a 3rd round value. I've got led up by Keenan Allen. I got Brandon Cooks coming next, and a surprise candidate, Michael Floyd, finishes out my top 15.
I'm looking at Kelvin Benjamin, Demaryius Thomas, and Amari Cooper. Who do you want to touch on?
Well, I think I've got to talk about two guys that I've got going a bit higher or maybe a lot higher. Keenan Allen, move him up a bit. In the games that he played last year, he averaged 12.13 points per game, which would have made him the 10th best fantasy receiver if he did that over the course of a whole season. And that's without scoring a lot of touchdowns. So if he continues that pace, or if he scores a few more touchdowns and drops off on the yardage pace, he could easily be a top 10 fantasy receiver. He's going in the fourth round. I think take him around early. Philip Rivers loves to throw it to one guy and one guy only. He locks in, and Keenan Allen's been that guy. I think he's going to have a good year.
I think Keenan Allen is a overvalued guy. He's just so inconsistent. He's been like very likely for injury.
Yeah.
He's bald. I just like not on board with him at all.
All right.
A guy who I got, who, speaking of injuries, coming back from one, Kelvin Benjamin, didn't play last year at all. I think some people might be forgetting about him a little bit. But his rookie season, over 1,000 yards, 9 TDs. I think Cam Newton is clearly a better quarterback than he was then. That offense was really impressive last year with nothing much but Greg Olsen getting those balls. And it's been a long time since Kelvin got hurt. I think he's got plenty of time to recover.
Yeah. I mean, he wasn't even a top 15 receiver when he was healthy his rookie year. Because of the injury, some other guys emerged. Ted Ginn became a pretty big focal point of the offense. Philly Brown emerged a bit. So I think missing the time let Cam develop chemistry with other guys, which could eat into his total. I think he probably finishes it around where he was at his rookie year. He doesn't have the typical third-year breakout for a wide receiver. Greg Olsen's really the number one option in that passing offense. So I have Kelvin outside of my top 15.
I agree with you on Olsen, but I'm not worried about Philly Brown. I'm not worried about Devin Funchess. I'm not worried about Ted Ginn. I think if Kelvin's there, he's going to be the receiver to look into.
And Michael Floyd is a 7th-round guy who I've got as a 3rd-round value. Last year he had the horrible injury during the preseason. His hand, I mean, look at the pictures online if you just Google it. It's nasty. It took him a long time. First of all, he missed some games. When he did get back, he wasn't 100%. But in the last 10 games that he played last year, he actually averaged 10.7 points per game, which if you projected that out over 16 games would have made him the number 12 receiver in fantasy. He's in a contract year. I think he wants to get paid either by the Cardinals or by somebody else. So I think he's a real breakout candidate. Obviously, his name has been thrown out as a breakout candidate before, and he disappointed. But I think Michael Floyd really does break out this year, and I think the Cardinals have a good offense. Palmer's looking his way. The only concern is that Fitzgerald and John Brown are both legitimate options outside of Floyd, but I think he's the number one option there, and I think he has a great year.
Yeah, I think John Brown, that hype is kind of hollow. Fitzgerald's just only getting older. I respect the call. I wouldn't have him near my top 15, but I can see your point.
All right. Now we're going to talk about some guys that are underrated. One of them almost made your top 15 overall, even though he's getting taken in the 14th round.
Yeah, that's Steve Smith Sr. Love his style. He was on my top 15 until very close to recording time here. Break his numbers down a little bit, and a lot of his points came in 1 week last year. He had about 30 points out of his, like 40% of his points, essentially.
Right.
But if he's healthy this year, and I don't see why he's not going to be. He seems to be on track to start week 1.
Right.
The value is unbelievable. At around 14, I would take him like around 6 maybe.
Yeah. All the points that we're talking about, just to clarify, are ESPN standard scoring. He had over 12 points per game last year. He would have been in the top 10 receivers if he had played a full season like that. But like you said, 30 of those points out of the 7 or 8 games that he played,
7.
Were in one game. So that represented, like you said, a huge percentage. But Steve Smith is the number one receiver for them. bit more competition maybe this year. Rashad Perriman, if he gets healthy. Mike Wallace, if he is anything like he used to be, which is unlikely.
They got Aiken there. He had a nice little year last year, too.
Right. But Steve Smith, super undervalued, criminally undervalued, I would say. Definitely, I would be taking him in the 9th or 10th round ahead of guys that their ceiling isn't near a top 10 receiver, and their floor is much lower than Steve Smith if he's healthy, and that's the big if. All right, next up, number 2 most underrated player, Tavon Austin, finished just outside the top 20 at receiver last year. Why do you think he is underrated?
Because he is going as the 45th receiver. He's the 20th receiver.
Right.
His floor is pretty high. Like, he gets so much work in the rushing game.
Yeah.
He showed that he can do it in the receiving game last year also. That offense is, I think it's going to be slightly improved, so I like the value.
Right. His value as a receiver isn't very good.
Yeah.
Only had 500 yards, a few touchdowns, but then he doubles that up when you add in his rushing total. So he's a guy who's very reliant on his rushing. He reminds me of Percy Harvin back in the day, but Percy Harvin would creep up into the 3rd or 4th round. You can still get Tavon Austin in the 12th round. That's unbelievable. Represents a much better value. I'd rather take him. His floor is higher and his ceiling is higher than a guy like Anquan Bolden or somebody that's going around that rank on average ESPN leagues.
He's like a Minnesota Vikings era Percy Harvin, where you could grab him in like the 8th round, he'd always perform like a 4th round guy.
Right.
So I think similar thing.
Yeah. Next up, 3rd most underrated, Allen Hurns. Average draft position, 9th round, the 34th receiver overall taken. But last year he was a solid wide receiver too. So why is he dropping so much?
Well, he's interesting. Neither of us, I think, love Allen Hurns or the Jacksonville receiving game in general.
Yeah.
But it's gone too far, the concern about him. Like, his first 2 seasons, he's been better than you want to admit. He's had a lot of touchdowns, and going this late, I'm on board with it. If it was like a 3rd or 4th round spot, which kind of makes more sense based on what he did last year, I don't want any part of it. But 9th round? Yeah,
that's crazy.
I'll throw him on my bench for sure.
Yeah. If you had to take him as a wide receiver too, I'd hate him. But if you can take him as a wide receiver 4 bench option, that's great. He's the better John Brown going after John Brown. So
yeah, that's perfect. Sums it up exactly.
4th most underrated, Torrey Smith, going in the 12th round, 43rd receiver overall taken. Did we get in a time machine and go back to the Baltimore Ravens, Torrey Smith? What's going on?
Yeah, we like a San Francisco receiver. We like Torrey Smith. None of this feels like 2016.
Right.
Chip Kelly is the new coach there. It's a different situation.
Yeah.
We've seen Chip Kelly take advantage of talented, athletic receivers.
Yeah, Deshaun Jackson, Jeremy Maclin, even Jordan Matthews the last 2 years.
I just think there's, in the 12th round, 43rd receiver, there's a really good chance it's a top 30 receiver. Like, I wouldn't be surprised by that at all. So,
good size, great speed, Chip Kelly, all those things point to him maybe being a lottery ticket. He might be terrible. You might drop him after 3 weeks, but lottery ticket in the 12th round doesn't get much better than Torrey Smith.
Yeah, I guess. He might be terrible, that's for sure, but might be worth it.
Last up, 5th most underrated, Travis Benjamin. Most of the year last year, he was a top 10 fantasy receiver on the Cleveland Browns, and the Cleveland Browns did not have much going on offense.
No.
He goes to the San Diego Chargers. Big quarterback upgrade. Not the number 1 option anymore if Keenan Allen's healthy, but as you pointed out earlier, Keenan Allen not always healthy.
Nope.
So Travis Benjamin, 50th receiver being taken, late 13th round. What else you got on him?
Well, I love the change of scenery to the Chargers, and Stevie Johnson's out all year. Keenan Allen, I don't have that much faith in. Antonio Gates is only getting older. The fact that you can get a guy that was a top 10 player for the first 2-3 months last year at the 50th receiver, it's worth it.
Yeah. Seems like a guy who you wake up at the end of the season, if you slept through it, and Keenan Allen went down with an injury, and all of a sudden he's the 20th best receiver and super startable, especially in the fantasy playoffs.
Yeah, there's always guys like that, and he seems like a fantastic candidate for the sneaky top 25 receiver performance.
The most overrated. We got to start off with the fact that wide receivers in general all of a sudden are a pinch overrated. Antonio Brown's the guy who's getting taken first in drafts. What happened to Adrian Peterson? He's always the first guy taken in drafts.
Yeah, or Gurley, the young stud.
Right.
That would be historically what would be going on there. I think, we've seen by the numbers about 5 to even 6 receivers going in the first round. It's everyone chasing that 1 or 2 stud season that happens every year at receiver.
Right.
And I think it's gone too far. Maybe we're old men trying to have our running backs in our first round. But if you break it down, I think it just makes more sense to have be mostly our running backs still up top.
Yeah, we're going to find out this year. Was last year the new normal when it comes to running backs, that all the top guys get hurt and everybody is in a backfield timeshare? Or was it an outlier? Was it, a season to write off? Everybody who took running backs in the first round last year, for the most part, got burned by it. So everybody's getting a little gun shy, which to me is an opportunity for somebody who's savvy to just take a running back and be like, look, last year was an outlier. I think the running backs are, where you win your fantasy league.
Yeah, and I mean, wide receivers are really deep,
Right.
You can always grab a receiver off the waiver wire and
Yeah.
it might work out for you. You can never do that at running back.
No.
So that just points to still try to solidify your backs.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. The most overrated individual wide receiver is Allen Robinson, a guy who's benefiting from what we just talked about, jumping into the first round or early second round. He's the 4th receiver being taken. Guy had a huge year last year. You don't see it being repeatable?
No, I mean, we both don't have him top 15. He's going about 4th at the position, so you might have thought we forgot about this guy. I wasn't thinking about him.
Right.
And we just talked about Alan Hearns, so what's going on with this Jacksonville opinion of ours?
Right.
But I just think it's all about the value. Allen Robinson has to be what he did last year or better to justify this draft position, and I don't know why he would do that. He did nothing his first year.
Right.
It was all touchdowns. Not all, but a lot of it was touchdowns last year, and I don't think that's repeatable.
Yeah, to me, he's Braylon Edwards circa 2008, 2009, when Braylon Edwards had come off of the year that he had in 2007 with 1,300 yards, 16 touchdowns. Everybody is thinking this guy is, right below Terrell Owens and Randy Moss, and all of a sudden, no, he was Braylon Edwards. I think Allen Robinson's the same guy. I think he's being super overrated right now. I think Julius Thomas eats into his work in the red zone. I think him and Allen Hearns kind of split it up in terms of the receiving game. And I think they didn't pay Chris Ivory all this money to sit on the bench and not run the football. I don't think they want captain interception throwing the ball all around the field like he did last year.
Yeah, I think they're definitely eyeballing a more balanced attack with Ivory, with TJ Yeldon,
Right.
and with Thomas being back. It can take all kinds of red zone attention away. So, number 2 overrated, coming in about 30th at number 28 in the 7th round, Dante Moncrief.
Well, it looks like you might be wearing the Colts uniform. You're not in love with Moncrief. I'm not either. He's going ahead of my guy, Michael Floyd. He's getting taken 28th at receiver on average in the 7th round. This is a guy who has good stretches of season, but never puts it together. And yet, every season he seems to be overhyped in fantasy. What's going on, Doc?
I don't know. What's he ever done? I would much rather reach a little early on T.Y. Hilton or wait a little longer even and then take a chance on Philip Dorsett.
Right.
Why are Philip Dorsett and Dante Moncrief not going to potentially have the same numbers? One you got to grab early, one you can take a late round flyer on.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I really think, as we talked about with T.Y. Hilton, that the Colts are going to have a great offensive season, especially in terms of the pass, but I think Dante Moncrief doesn't get enough of a pie to justify being the 28th receiver. I don't think he's a flex consideration. I think he's a bench guy that might be nice to have for your bye week, but at best.
Yeah, maybe he's owned, maybe he's not by the end of the year, honestly.
Yeah. Third, a guy who was really good last year, especially down the stretch, Doug Baldwin. Getting taken 20th at receiver, getting taken in the 5th round.
Yeah, 14 TDs on 80 receptions.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem like something you see very often. Doesn't seem like something you're going to see again.
No. In terms of points per target last year, he was scoring 1.85 points per target. That's twice as many as guys like Demaryius Thomas, Mike Evans, and it's touchdowns are fluky when it comes to wide receivers. James Jones had 15 touchdowns one year, and the next year he didn't.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Russell Wilson targets Doug Baldwin every possession again, but
Right.
maybe their running game's a little bit better, and maybe they spread it around. Maybe Jimmy Graham is healthy this year.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, Jimmy Graham certainly seems like he'll cut into that, where Tyler Lockett was seemingly getting better as the season progressed. So
Yeah.
Doug Baldwin, I think he returns to being the 32nd best receiver like he always is, other than last year.
Yeah, Doug Baldwin, overrated.
All right. Number 4 on the overrated, a guy who, when he was healthy last year, was the, 7th best receiver in terms of points per game, Julian Edelman. Why is he going to have a bad year? He was so good.
He's going in the 5th round. Tom Brady loves him, but what's going to be missing the first 4 games? Tom Brady.
Right.
Deflategate finally showing its effects.
Yeah.
And I think Jimmy Garoppolo for 4 games it makes Edelman not worth it.
Yeah. Edelman's really good when he plays with Tom Brady, but he doesn't play that often because he's a little guy who goes over the middle, takes big hits, gets injuries. He's not a superior talent. He's a byproduct of the system. The system's not going to be clicking the way it normally does with Tom Brady out. Julian Edelman's going to regress a decent amount this year. And he's a guy, after 3 weeks, when people are overreacting to the fact that he's not good, maybe you trade for him, but he's not a guy you draft where he's going.
No, I love that. Pick him up late, week 3, week 4, but not in the draft.
No. And the last guy on our list, Sammy Watkins, another guy who, when he plays, he's fantastic. He was 8th in terms of average points per game last year. He got hurt. Tyrod got hurt. He can't stay healthy in either of his first 2 years. Sammy Watkins, what do you got to say about him?
I think he's always been overrated. When he's healthy, yeah, he's very good. ADP of 11th, not out of line, but like you said, Tyrod, I don't know if he's going to be good next year.
Right.
Like, he came out of nowhere. There's just a lot of guys I'd rather have than Watkins that early in the position rankings.
Yeah. Doug Baldwin was the number 1 guy in terms of points per target last year by a wide margin. But number 2 was Sammy Watkins. He's very touchdown dependent, scoring 1.66 points per target. That's not sustainable in the history of the NFL. Guys don't sustain that pace unless they're a massive, massive red zone weapon, like a Julius Thomas when he was playing with Denver or something like that. Sammy Watkins is only 6'1". He's not a massive red zone target. He catches long passes and turns them into touchdowns, and that's what he does. It also makes him a boomer bust guy week to week. So even if he does produce at that level, it's not a guy that you're 100% certain this is the fantasy championship and this guy's going to win it for me. So Sammy Watkins, I think he's a good player, but I think he's overrated where he's going as the number 11 wide receiver in the 3rd round.
Yeah, you said it. He's boomer bust, and he busts his bones about every 3rd or 4th week. So
Please subscribe to us on our channel here. Tune in next time for Fantasy Footnotes.
yeah, throw your comments and questions down below, guys. Thanks a lot.